Ciao ragazzi, welcome back to the Let's Talk Football podcast. This one, all about Italy, the national team, where I think they're going, where we are right now. I'm just going to basically have a run through of all of its problems and the downfall we've seen over the last decade, 15 years, whatever you want to call it. I think I'm really going to focus in on the period from, well, let's say since the turn of the century. I just wanted to first touch on more recent news and obviously this ongoing crisis that we've got going on with the federation. We've sacked Spalletti after this recent round of World Cup qualifiers. Obviously the 3-0 loss to Norway in Oslo last Friday was the nail in the coffin. But you know, the president, Gabriele Gravina, I think they struggle in the federation. I think the national team as a whole is struggling. They've for whatever reason not planned a replacement in advance. They've sacked Spalletti. Obviously, the noise that's come out of, you know, Italian media and Italian newspapers, Corriere dello Sport, one of the biggest in that country, was that Claudio Ranieri was the main target, and he's turned the national team down with his desire to stay in whatever capacity at Roma. So it's looking bleak. I think first, if we're talking about Spalletti, let's just have a run through of his time with the national team since he joined in the summer of 2023. I think it's not gone well. I mean, we can talk about Mancini's time. Obviously, they won the Euros and then failed to qualify for the most recent World Cup in 2022. Spalletti then came in and he's only won 11 from 23 games in charge. Oversaw a really, really poor Euro campaign last summer, which, I mean, I think if you ask any Italian or any fan of the Italian national team, there was no confidence or no belief really. I mean, you can say you'll always have a belief, you'll always have a hope that your national team can produce something magic, and we know in football crazy things can happen, but I don't think, if you ask any Italian person, that there was no belief really going into that tournament that there was anything special on the cards, or that we could even make a good attempt to retain the trophy. Obviously knocked out by Switzerland in the round of 16. If you remember, Italy scraped through the group stage of that competition. I think we had Croatia on the final group stage game and drew in the last minute to go through, so equalised in the last minute. So very, very poor tournament. And I think it's not just been recent years. I think it's that tournament's been a culmination of years and years of disappointment and failure. Spalletti did his best. Obviously, he's tried to keep his momentum up as a manager. He obviously won the Scudetto with Napoli right before he became the Italian national manager. But it's been a troubling time, I'd say, since Spalletti has come in. Granted, we've not had the plethora of talent or a generation of players like we did in the early 2000s, late 90s, even in the late 2000s, I would say. But I think the real quality level has gone down overall with the national team and its players. But before we go on to that, I just want to touch on Ranieri. So it's been reported Ranieri was the FIGC, the federation's first choice to replace Spalletti, and for Gravina, the president. Since he took over Roma last season, which was around winter time, this is a brilliant start, they were only beaten by Barcelona for points per game in the European top 5 leagues in that period, which is just a phenomenal record. They almost got Champions League, just missing out in the top 4 in Serie A. And I can see why Ranieri was the choice. I think his notorious ability to revive troubled situations, his notorious ability to come into clubs that are struggling, or with the ability to bring a presence, bring a spirit, bring an energy to a club. I think obviously the most obvious one is Leicester, and obviously coming into a side that had just escaped a relegation and winning the league the next season. I mean, it's probably the greatest underdog story ever, definitely in English Premier League history. And then he's obviously had spells at Inter, Roma last season, plethora of experience. Obviously Italian, which is for me a preference, and this new wave in international football that we're seeing now of national team managers coming in not from that nation, I think is something I'm not particularly a fan of. I think everyone in the whole, national team space should be from that nation. I think that is the point of international breaks. That is the point of international tournaments. Having everyone from that nation, having that passion, having that camaraderie, having that collective identity from that nation. And I think for the most part, obviously throughout history it has been that way, but we see now with Tuchel in England, we're seeing with Martinez in Portugal, Ancelotti in Brazil. Ancelotti, funnily enough, would have been my choice to take the national team forward. I think we're really struggling. Inzaghi would have been a great choice, but I think generally we're struggling as a country in Italy I think there's a real lack of options of Italian managers at that very top level. I think Ancelotti and Inzaghi really are the only two who have been at that top level in recent seasons. So I think now it's going to be difficult to find someone to come in to replace Spalletti who's got that pedigree, who's got that experience, and who's ready to embrace that challenge, because it is a difficult job. I think for a national side as big as Italy, I think you can argue we're in the 3 or 4 biggest national sides ever in the history of football. To have missed out on the last 2 World Cups is tragic, really, and it's not good for the game. I think no matter what anyone says, or allegiances or rivalry, you want to see Italy in the biggest tournaments. They're one of the biggest nations in the history of football, as I just said. But listen, the FIGC now looking at Pioli, Stefano Pioli, who's currently at Al Nassr. Obviously, he's moved to Saudi after his spell at Milan, winning the Scudetto there. He's got a contract for another 2 years. In fairness, you've got to give credit where it is due. He led Milan to their first Scudetto in over a decade, a few seasons back. And that was obviously a magic moment for the Rossoneri, who had been struggling for so long for success domestically and in Europe. Obviously, they had their golden periods in the late 80s, in the 90s, and would remain dominant throughout the 2000s. They've had troubles with the ownership and troubles financially, but Pioli came in and did a really good job, obviously with Leao, Theo Hernandez. I believe Ibrahimovic was still there in a player coach capacity in that year that they won the league. Pioli, in fairness, he finished top 4 every season. He was in Milan every full season. I think he joined partway through his first year, but in the 4 full seasons following, he finished in the top 4. I believe he finished second on a couple of occasions. Obviously then won the Scudetto. His final year, he finished second, finished runner-up, but 19 points behind city rivals Inter, I think, was the final chapter for Pioli. If you're asking me and my general feeling about Pioli, it doesn't convince me, if I'm being totally honest. I think this isn't really the time now to bring in someone of real pedigree. I think Mancini was the one, obviously, when he came in a few years ago, who had real pedigree, in different leagues, and obviously came in and had that success in Euro 2020. Whether you can call that a fluke or you can call that a one-off, I'm not so sure you can. I think if you look back at the tournament, I think Italy were the best team in that tournament consistently throughout every round. You could say we took advantage of a different period. Obviously, it was still COVID times and it wasn't full stadiums, but I think this is a real challenge for the FIGC. Now, if you're asking me who I would want as the new manager, and obviously it kind of contradicts what I did say about having an Italian manager and keeping that theme. I think with the win, I think I would love Jose Mourinho. I think he is someone who I believe has wanted to go into international football and go into that side of the sport throughout his whole career. Obviously, he stayed at club level for his 20 odd years. He's been in management, been uber successful. He's won everything you can at club level wherever he's been. But if I was the federation, I would be going all out for him. I think obviously he's at Fenerbahce. I think he's got only a year left on his deal, but I think he's had experience in Italy. He feels Italian to me. I don't know why, non so perché, but he feels like an Italian manager. He has that style. Obviously, you can resonate his managerial style with the Italian identity and culture of that. That defensive solidarity, the compactness, the robustness. I think that identifies really well with Mourinho. So, and I think, to be honest, if we've seen his journey over the last decade or so, I think his style hasn't been able to adapt and modify his philosophy pretty well or very well to the modern game and the way the modern game has gone. I think that's where he struggled, especially in the top leagues. We saw at United, he didn't quite get close enough, obviously, against a brilliant Guardiola City team. Then at Tottenham, it didn't go quite as planned. Then he went back to, we saw him at Roma, and he did quite well there, in fairness. He got a Conference League title. But I think his style right now, at this period in his career, would really suit knockout football, international football, where it's more of a moments style of football. It's not particularly on performance or performance over 90 minutes, let's say. I think a moment can change everything in a knockout game in tournament football. So that's where I come from. I think he's got the pedigree, he's got the experience at the top level, he's got the caliber. He's the caliber of manager that I think the Italian Federation should be looking for. And it's someone they have to be going, or they have to at least be having a look at. I was reading an article yesterday on Corriere dello Sport, one of the main Italian news outlets, and for sports, and it read Jose Mourinho perché no, which is why not? Why would we not go for someone at this level? Someone who, again, he gives me an Italian feel. Obviously he's Portuguese, but he gives me that style of manager. I think he would suit it so well. I think it would be a good match, especially at this period. And I think at this time where we're looking for, or we should be looking for, in my opinion, someone of that ilk, I think it would be a good move. Now, whether the Federation are looking for that, or whether they're looking to stick for an Italian manager, which wouldn't surprise me. But that personally would be my opinion, would be my pick on who the Federation should be going for. Now, I also, doing some planning yesterday, I wanted to look at the past, in this century, since the turn of the century, how have Italy done it in major tournaments? And it's, I've put down here it's been a disaster. It might be a little bit far-fetched, but it's not been good. If we're going to describe it, it's been poor. For a nation who have won 4 World Cups, only beaten by Brazil and 2 European Championships, I think it's been as close to a disaster as you could think. Now, looking right at the start of the century, got to the final of the Euro 2000, losing out to France. Listen, it can be acceptable getting to a final of any major tournament. Obviously, that period we were having a very, very golden era of players, of attackers, defensively. I think all over the pitch we had fantastic talent. You think of the likes of Del Piero, who was in and around his prime at that moment. You think of Totti, you think of Christian Vieri, you think of Gattuso and all these names, and then you've obviously got Maldini back then, Nesta coming through, Buffon coming through, he was young at that time, but I think then we obviously won the World Cup in 2006. Got to the quarterfinals of Euro 2008, losing out to the eventual winner Spain. So look, this run of tournaments, I don't think you can complain too badly. I think obviously with the talent we had, I think that was probably the minimum expectation. To get to a quarterfinal, probably a semi-final. And then the World Cup in 2010 in South Africa, I think that's where we saw cracks. I think this is where a lot of that great talent that we saw in that period, I think obviously, let me mention a few more names. Obviously Andrea Pirlo. I think further in the middle of the 2000s, you think of Cannavaro, obviously won the Ballon d'Or. You know, we've got Zambrotta defensively. Plethora of names that could go on forever and ever, but I think this is kind of that period where those talents were starting to drop off or aging, and they were thinking of retiring, and we didn't have a collective group of talent that could see success on the international stage. I think obviously in 2010 we saw a group stage exit, which is obviously a disaster. Got to the final of Euro 2012, losing out to that generational Spain team. And then out of the group stage in 2014 in the World Cup in Brazil, losing in the quarterfinals of Euro 2016. And then obviously not qualifying for the last 2 World Cups, sandwiched by the victory in the last not the last Euros, Euro 2020. So I think there has to be someone who can steady the ship and look to find a way to bring this talent together. Don't get it twisted. I think there's a lot of talent in the squad. I think if you look at the likes of Alessandro Bastoni and Donnarumma's obviously playing at a top level right now, having recently won the Champions League. Bastoni's been fantastic for Inter this season. Barella's a top midfielder. We've got some younger midfielders coming through like Ricci and Locatelli I really like as a player. I saw before Christian Vieri, he likes the potential pairing of Moise Kean and Matteo Retegui, which, you know, looking at it, is a good pairing. I think both have had good seasons in Italy. If I'm not wrong, I think Retegui was the top scorer in Serie A. Could be wrong there, but and Kane had a really good season at Fiorentina. So listen, there are some things to like about the squad, and I don't think it's a terrible group or a squad that's completely lacking in talent. I think we have got options. I think it's funny I mentioned those two because I have bemoaned over the last few years that we are lacking some real top quality attackers. And I think if you look at in comparison to the other top nations, even the likes of England, you know, in their recent, you know, success getting to finals and semi-finals of tournaments, you look at the likes of Harry Kane, but it's the depth of talent they've got, and you look at Kane and Saka and Rashford, Phil Foden, Jack Grealish, and obviously a lot of young names coming through. You look at the likes of France, and it's frightening their attack. Obviously, you've got Mbappe, Dembele, who's had a fantastic year. You've got the youngsters in Barcola and Doué, Cherki, who's had a real breakthrough season. And then Germany, even Musiala and Wirtz, who's obviously recently confirming his move to Liverpool, and Sané. I think there's levels to it, and I think that's a real issue that we're going to need to see some real talent come through. I think when you look back at our Euro campaign in 2020, I think Chiesa was brilliant, and his career is just, you'd think his career would have taken off, and I think it wasn't too long after that I believe he got an ACL injury, and that's just completely halted his career. Obviously, he's had limited minutes at Liverpool this year, fell out with Motta, Juve last season, and just hasn't been able to get that consistency. But the talent is there to see, and I believe he's still 26, 27, so he's not completely out of the picture. I would love to see him back in the squad at some stage if he can, find a club this summer. I can't see him getting the game time he needs at Liverpool with the quality they have in attack. So I think that's a worry for me. But the main thing is for the federation is to get a manager who fits the identity of the country. And look, it wouldn't shock me if they're going to go for an Italian. I think that is very much in the style of the federation. But again, I think Mourinho fits the identity of the Italian national team. I think he suits the Italian game, if you will, and I think his style at this moment suits knockout football. He would be my number one pick, and I think if we're going to be really ambitious and really, focused on going for success over this next decade, 12-year period, especially for the next few tournaments anyway, I think we're obviously going to need to get one in now. I think it was probably the right timing to sack Spalletti at this moment. Obviously, he said he was sacked. Obviously, this debacle about him being sacked, being let go, this nonsense about letting him manage his last game on Monday against Moldova, even though he had been told he was sacked before then after the Norway loss. So, but I think if we were going to do it, now was the right time, at the start of the World Cup qualifiers. Obviously, we've won and lost a game now, and it'll be tough to top Norway in that group, which is really where we need to be aspiring to be. But it's going to have to be a big decision, but they're going to have to show balls. They're going to have to show palle, we call it in Italy, and show that courage to bring in a manager of that quality, because I think that's what it will take. I don't think we can be looking at any upcoming managers or any young Italians. Not that any really are available. I think it's going to have to be one of experience. I think it's going to be one of that pedigree and that calibre that will really help to settle that picture in the national team, because I think it is a mess at the moment. I think a lot of it needs to be reset, and the system of the federation is pretty outdated. But I would love to see Mourinho. I love his character. I think his personality would be infectious. And it's a pretty young group as well. Let's not forget, it's not the time to be too harsh on national team. It's a pretty young group. Obviously, I think we cannot underestimate the losses of Chiellini and Bonucci and Buffon over the last 5, 6, 7 years, especially from that Euro campaign where Chiellini and Bonucci were so critical to the success as leaders. I just don't know where we have those leaders in the team and that experience, that composure, those who have been there and done that. And I think we've got a few in there now who get into those ages, them late 20s, and Barella and Donnarumma's done it all at the top level, who have that experience. But I think throughout the squad, I think the spine will really lack in those leaders who have that courage and that grinta, we call it as well, that can help take the team forward. But I think it will start from the manager, and I'm praying, I'm really hoping the federation get it right. Listen, Pioli, if he comes in, I'm going to support him, but it just does not convince me at this moment in time. I think it has to be someone of the ilk of a Mourinho, even though he is obviously contracted to Fenerbahce. But let's go for it. Take that challenge. Get Mourinho in. I think that is my number one pick. That is, maybe it's a bit ambitious and a bit unrealistic, but I think if we're going to really look for success at next year's World Cup, the Euros and the World Cup after that, I think someone of that level is needed. So, I mean, the Federation aren't going to be watching, but they've got a big decision on their hands, and it's going to be interesting to see. I'm pretty sure it'll be over the next week or two, the decision. Obviously, I believe we don't have any more international football for a little while now, so they have got time, but they need to get it right. But yeah, those are my thoughts on this mess that the FIGC have got the Italian national team in. But let's see where it goes. Grazie mille again, guys. Thanks for watching the latest episode on the next Let's Talk Football podcast.